Uh, uh, yeah, it's the Mara thing. It's like the Mara was on this lorry on the back there, and before I was standing on the way. Now I'm standing on the side of the road. But still, and Mara it's a driverless lorry that just goes somewhere or nowhere or whatever, and it comes by again and again.
It's even worse than that.
Yeah.
It's a driverless lorry that is out to get you.
Yeah, yes. But at least now I can stand on the side watching it. But Mara is on there and putting his spell on me. It's some kind of spell. I feel drawn to it, and that's where the disgust comes. It's
Okay.
like, come along, and I've been doing that before
Oh,
so
all
much.
right.
Yeah.
Well, basically, think of it like this. Think of it that we are all animals in the woods, and that there are hunters out there who are setting traps. And that there's always something delicious to eat inside of the trap. And so we are all curious and interested in all of these traps out there because we think that there's a goodie in there. And the thought is, I can get the goodie and escape the trap. Or another way of thinking about it is that I can get away with it.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that calls us. It calls us in the sense of that you can get the goodie and you don't have to pay for it. And while we can actually understand that that's kind of magical belief on the child's part, and that when we grow up, we recognize that really that's not so true in the physical world. But it takes us a long time to let go of that in the mental world. So that we think that we can get the mental goodies without having to pay the price for it. Now, this is in fact really wrapped up in one's right view. And so this is really kind of important stuff for you to recognize your disgust is now part of your right view.
Yeah.
Now, wrong view is where the sutta starts. In fact, I should give you a bit of background on this. This is coming from Sutta number 117, the Great 40, where the Buddha says in the beginning of the sutta, to pay attention, monks, I'm going to teach you right noble samadhi, with all of its requirements and attributes. Now, this is kind of funny. Most people don't get those two things, but the requirements and the attributes. And then he talks about it as a unified mind, that when the mind comes together, it's unified, which means no more conflict of interest, no more doubts, no more lies, no more hurting others in order to get our way, and all of that kind of stuff. So this is actually the goal or the path of having the unified mind, the mind that's noble. And then he says next that of the requisites, the first requisite and the important one is right view. But in a contextual way, we have to understand view in three ways. And the first one is the wrong view, which I can get away with it. In other words, it doesn't matter what the rules are, I can get away with it. One's right view then is no, you can't get away with it.
Yeah.
In other words, you must follow the rules because you cannot get away with it. This leads all the way into the magical belief system of the law of karma that would be stated this way. that good actions give good results and bad actions give bad results. And then the magical part. First part of it is true. The magical part is, and that will happen no matter what. It will eventually come to pass that everything you've done wrong is going to catch up with you, and that everything that you've done right will catch up with you. That's the magical part.
Mm.
And the way that the Buddha showed that was by bringing in other kinds of karma. Now, the third kind of karma is mixed karma. In fact, in several sutras, it talks about heavy and light versus in other sutras, it talks about dark and bright. Bright actions give bright results. Dark action gives dark results.
Yeah.
Most people just think of it in the sense of good or bad. Basically, that good or bad that we're actually talking about here is not right or wrong, but it's do I like it or do I not like it? Because one of the magical things that can happen and often does is if I like it, it must be good. And if I don't like it, it must be bad. Okay? Which is also the kind of ignorance that I like it, therefore I want it and have to have it. Or I don't like it, and therefore I have to do something about it. I have to take that pill, get rid of it somehow. So back at the level of the mixed kind of karma, first off, let's even define what is good or bad. If you bought some stock in a company and on the stock market, and the stock went up, then the action of buying would be a good action, right?
I'm not sure I agree with this because
Right, exactly. That's exactly where we're going with it. Okay.
Okay.
Because in fact, the answer at that level is that the answer or the result of the action determines the value of the original action. And so therefore it's very complicated to define what is a good action and a good result. Because oftentimes in our human experience, it's the result that determines whether the action was good or bad. But now let's look at one that's actually mixed, and that is that the referee throws a penalty flag out on the field of the stadium where they're having a big championship. And half of the crowd stands with their arms in the air and roars, "Yay, yay, that was a good call." But the other half of the stand, they jump up and put their arms in the air and they say, "Boo, boo, bad call." Yeah. All right. Was that action of the referee a good call or a bad call?
That's the same with that. I don't take positions like that usually.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this teaching is really all about, is to not take those kind of positions. But we can see that some good actions are actually good because the result is good and it's immediate. Yeah. That this is where the Buddha really talked about it, and this is in several places, including that very famous sutta of the lion's roar, number 12, the long lion's roar sutta, is where he says that the extent of the mind of the Buddha is that he knows that karma is dependent, that it's dependently arisen in this moment. Okay, so this is an important point. You can also look at it from the perspective of the four imponderables, or the things that cannot be figured out. And one of them is the results of karma. We do not know what the result of the karma is going to be.
Yeah.
And because of that, if we take that at just face value for what we just said, then that gives many people the idea, oh, well, I can get away with it. And so it's dangerous to teach some people this because that will throw them into wrong view when in fact they were better off when they had ordinary right view that you will get caught. Okay, because now we understand, all right, that that karma is actually much more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
The actual description of one's ordinary right view has a lot of stuff associated with magic. And one of the things that it actually talks about is that we may not have had a certain magical experience, but that we know that there are Brahmins and mystics who have told us of these mystical experiences that they have had. And not only do we believe that they have had those experiences, but we thirst for them and are going to be taking right actions in order to get them.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, this is part of ordinary right view, and you can see people doing that all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
So that a student who has a teacher, and the teacher has written in his own book, on certain day at certain time, I had a certain life reincarnation experience, and I was this kind of person with this kind of robe on and did these kinds of things. Okay, full-on story of that, and now the student wants it too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and so now the student is more interested in getting an experience than he is in straightening out his own mind.
Yes.
And so this is part of ordinary right view, which is trying to do good things, so for some future good result. Merit in Thailand is strictly based on this, Saibot, Talkbot, and all of that. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was a bit strange on that, and referenced it in one way about that he doesn't say thank you.
Okay.
Because if the person who's being generous and puts the food in the bowl gets a thank you, then that's their reward. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa wants them to generate their own reward, that they feel good because they're feeling generous.
Okay, yeah.
As opposed to the other side of the coin would be, oh, I can't say thank you now because that will be the reward you get now, which means I'm robbing you of the reward you would get for it in heaven.
Okay.
Which is even more magical belief.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Mm.
Same basically as, do you pray in public or do you pray in private?
Yeah.
If you right, that's one of the things that Jesus says. If you're praying in public, then this is your reward. You're praying.
Oh.
This is it. This is all you get, is the time you spend at the prayer. So you better might as well feel good while you're praying, because this is all you get. But praying in private, then, if you really modify the word prayer just a little bit, beyond from prayer to meditation, but really from prayer to investigation.
I never
we really
understood.
Don't know what Buddha taught. Jesus. What do you say?
I never understood prayer at all.
Prayer?
Yeah. I never.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here is what prayer basically has come down to. That you've probably seen a lot. Is that some dude wants something so bad that he wants God to change God's plan.
Yeah.
In order to give this guy what he wants.
Yes.
But instead of changing the whole plan, which is real, maybe we can just magicalize it and twist it just a little bit so that this guy gets what he wants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the thing that we know is that not only is prayer generally completely ineffective, but in some cases is actually detrimental and scientifically provable so.
Mm.
If you keep telling somebody, oh, I'm going to pray for you, I'm going to pray
Yeah.
for you, they feel really bad and
Yeah.
they get sicker
Yeah.
and sicker.
Yeah. Yes. Because it's as if that person is better than the other one, and that person knows exactly what the other person is supposed to do and have the solution and all of that. Yeah.
Another way that I see the word prayer used, and this is actually quite often the way that I see it most, just because of the kind of position that I'm in. Christians may use the word prayer more or less the way that I was saying it before. But another way that the word is used is it's the slough off end of a dialogue that the Christian has completely lost and he knows it. And so his parting shot is, well, I'll pray for you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, which is kind of a catty, passive aggressive kick in the butt.
Yeah. Yeah. I can sense that sometimes with people, but yeah, that's it. Yes.
All right. Now, one of the words that prayer has been associated with is the word vigil. And in fact, that's the word that Jesus used on the Garden of Gethsemane. Can't you guys stay up? You see, the story was that Jesus was up all night. Buddhist monks are up all night on a frequent basis that pat him off.
Mm-hmm.
But none of his guys could do it. They all went to sleep on him.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't maintain their wakefulness or their awakeness
Mm-hmm.
in part of that training. So vigilance and wakefulness and coming out of our ordinary slumber is a part of what Jesus taught,
Mm-hmm.
as well as things like the kingdom of God is within you. Actually, the Greek is basilica, theos, as if we've got a huge cathedral inside of us, a holy place,
Mm-hmm.
and that this is actually the home of God is within you.
Yeah.
Which means then, if you want to find the kingdom of God, we've got to go within, which brings that whole aspect of um, going inside and investigating, doing a vigil, and that kind of stuff. So this is the kind of the message that Jesus lost. Now let's look at the Lord's Prayer because it's quite famous. The
Mm-hmm.
first part of it that starts off is Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The word Father there is the word Abba. And the way that Abba has come about, in fact, that's the word about, above.
Uh-huh.
That's the word Abba, and it means those things that are bigger than us, surrounding us, about us. And so the abbey then is going to be the environment for the group or the individual, and the abbot then is the one that's in charge of the abbey. So in this regard, we're kind of mixing the metaphors between these, but this is where that kind of language comes from. So when the 16th century King James Greek guys got a hold of this word Abba, they didn't understand that it has a real usage. And so the only thing that they could think of it is that it's the Father. But if you want to think of it like this, you're breathing in and out. You're breathing part of your environment. In a way, each in breath and out breath is full with God. And you can think of God as the Father, but we have to kind of understand what we mean by the word God. But Jesus is talking about, here it is, our Father who art in this heaven. Okay, the heaven that is within us. This is a holy thing.
Mm.
And that what Jesus is then saying, let that peace that can be found within, a natural peace, let that be for all of the people of the world. So this is actually a statement of metta. Then the leading us not into temptation means that we should be able to learn to control our mind and deliver us from evil, the evilness of our own mind. So you can see that that kind of prayer does not have to have the fishy religious qualities to it, but in fact, in a different, slightly different translation, it actually is a restatement of the purpose that Jesus was actually there for. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, by the way, was a big fan of Jesus.
Okay.
And part of the reason for that was because he got the Gospels in Thai language, but he got them kind of raw, without any Christian influence at all.
Aha. Okay.
And so he could say directly. In fact, one of the conversations that I had with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was about this very thing. And it was quite a long conversation that lasted more than over just one episode. But what the question is how could Jesus' teachings be so spot on? That's basically the question, which means now we've got to show how the teachings of the Buddha moved out of Bihar all the way into the Mediterranean, and at what times did that happen? And what were the influences and other things like this? One of the points that we can look at is that in Egypt, only pharaohs were mummified until about 300 BC. And then all of a sudden, anybody who had pocket change to have the ceremonies and all the work done got mummified. So now they're starting digging up thousands of mummies that happened all starting at that particular time. And yet before that, there wasn't. So there was something then about that, that pharaohs, emperors, Chinese emperors and others have the capability with the right sort of resources to gain immortality. Now everybody's got some kind of immortality. It swept across everything. And the idea behind it was that was when the idea from the Brahmins, because the old Brahmins, back to karma, the Brahmins had this statement that we are Brahmins, we're the ones who do all the ceremony and basically wind up owning all the land because we take it when at funeral times and other times. And so before the Aryan invasion, which we're not quite sure of exactly the time, it probably happened over centuries, but it happened way before the 8th century BC. So that the Brahmins were losing their property, they were losing their control. And so they came up with the idea that we're Brahmins, we are special. We are born Brahmin and you are not born Brahmin. We were born Brahmin because we were good in the past, and you were not born Brahmin because you were not good in the past. Okay, so that elitism that gave rise into the 4 caste system actually existed in India way back into antiquity between the Brahmins and everybody else. But when the invasion happened, probably from Persia, as the Persian Empire broke down, there was a lot of influence. Later, there was Alexander the Great coming in. But before that, in prehistory, the Aryans were the one who were lighter skinned, bigger in stature, had big armies. But not only did the armies come, but the general population came. And one of the ways they did is when an army in the old days traveled, more than half the army were not actually in the army. They were there to support the army. Blacksmiths and wagoneers and animal keepers and all of these kind of people. They became then the merchant class of India. So that the Sudras, the ones who were originally there that were not Brahmins, they got pushed to the bottom. And then the ruling class, the class that the Buddha was in, the Aryan class, were there who competed mostly with the Brahmins. So this is the Brahmin story, is we can at least keep our thing together because we were good in the past.
Okay.
Right. So this is where all of that karma stuff came from, and that by about the time of Alexander the Great, which happened, I'm not exactly sure of the dates, but Alexander the Great was in India and got turned around and sent back out by either the predecessors of Asok himself, or those right after, because we're talking about the 300 BC range of time. I think, in fact, that Asok was crowned in 310 AD, and that Alexander the Great, I'm not sure when he died, but the date 323 comes up, which meant that it could have been in the previous generation. But Asok came along, and then he was the one who did all of the pillars. They put everything in linguistics. In fact, part of the story about Lumpini is they didn't know where it was. Even in the 1970s, they didn't know where Lumpini was until they found a pedestal that had all this writing on it from the time of King Asok. Asok knew where Lumpini was and put down a marker for it. And they finally dug up that marker. It wasn't where they thought it would be, and that's why it took them so long to find it.
Okay.
But that's how they labeled Lumpini, which was the birthplace of the Buddha, that they didn't know until in our lifetimes. Didn't know where it was, just had stories about it. But now we have absolutely hard evidence because they knew where it was in 300 BC, which was the time that Alexander the Great was in India. And so now we have this connection that winds up having, this is the time when all of those mummies started appearing in Egypt. And we have to think there's got to be little threads or connections here someplace. And so that was my argument with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And then there's the issue of therapeutic, which gives us the word therapy in English was a group of healers in Alexandria. But if you look at the word therapeutic, you get Theravada immediately.
Okay.
And that this group was well known. In fact, this was possibly the group that Jesus went to when he went to Egypt. And then we have the white-robed Essene, or Essence, that predated Jesus by 100 years, that lived exactly the way that you would expect Buddhist monks to live, including the ritual baths, which may have taken the ritual baths of the Jews and mixed it with the bathing rites that the Buddhist monks had and kind of put them together and everything like that. So we have a huge number of connections that I kind of feel that I know exactly where Jesus got his literature. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says, no, we don't need any of those kind of connections because the Dhamma is the Dhamma. And that the Dhamma is available to all. And sometimes all they need is a bit of a hint.
Yeah.
And so that's a major connection that I see. But Christianity has actually lost what Jesus was on about because they brought too much magic into it. They brought a fair amount of magic into the Buddha, but we can generally scrub that off like it was paint. So back to the karma then, and going from that karma and the laws of karma that are associated with ordinary right view, we now come and look at supramundane right view. Because supramundane right view is, in fact, the beginning of the path. The Buddha's already stated this is the noble path. What we're actually getting at then is there's actually at least two different paths that Buddhists have. One is the path that they get on when they get interested in the Dhamma, and then the other one is the noble path, because they have to make that noble step. And once the mind becomes noble or mobile-minded, in fact, when the student begins to get nobly minded, or they take on a noble view, now the whole path becomes noble. Okay? And so in the regard of the karma, then there is the fourth kind of karma that the Buddha talks about. And that's the kind of karma that's neither bright nor dark, that gives results. That are neither bright nor dark. Hot eats lunch and he poops. Cause and effect. Neither one was bright nor dark. Okay, the action was eating, and that was neither bright nor dark, and the pooping was the result, and that was neither bright nor dark. And then the next point about it is the one that really is curious and interesting. And he says, but this kind of karma leads to the end of karma. All right. So let's investigate that just a little bit. If the mind is noble to the point that we are on guard for, and let us say enthusiastically determined to be free from dukkha, then that alone is going to prevent us from having dark actions. We're not going to go around hurting people, giving dark results like that. Okay. But also we begin to get really, really here now oriented, so that we don't go doing a whole lot of stuff for the distant future, expecting distant results. We stop doing a lot of stuff. Also, we stop doing things to get rid of, for instance, to get rid of anxiety, because there's not much of anxiety there. We don't go and buy guns to solve us of our fears, because we don't have fear. So we don't go and do a whole lot of stuff. This is actually the kind of karma that does lead to the end of karma. Not to the end of, or not to the beginning or the fruition of actual laziness, but it is that we become very selective about the actions that we take. Which this would be a good segue into the stuff that I sent you, but I'll resist and continue on. And we'll talk about that later. But meanwhile, back to this sutta, the Buddha then, when he says that he's going to actually describe right noble view, when I got to that point, I says, hot diggity dog, he's going to actually tell me what right view is. But then when I start reading, I become kind of disgusted, or disappointed at least, because I don't find a right view. Okay. What we do find, though, is it starts off with wisdom, the faculty of wisdom, the faculty of investigation. And that's the key word, to keep investigating, that one's right view is a view of look at what's going on and see things clearly. That's what is one's right view, and it's no longer a viewpoint, but rather the viewpoint can be moved around, which is the way of looking at compassion now. An example of that is that you want to take a picture of a bird, but the bird just went into his nest, and now you can't see him.
Mm.
So you can't take a picture of it until you change your view.
Mm.
But if you try to climb that tree, I don't think the bird's going to stay in the nest long enough for you to get his photo. But you get what I'm talking about. That always we think of the view from a viewpoint,
Mm.
and always our viewpoint is, guess who?
Mm.
Me.
Yeah.
And, and so noble right view then is to begin to change the viewpoint so that we can see other people's points of view.
Oh.
We can see a larger, broader picture, that
Yeah.
we can in fact hold a particular viewpoint, say about the Dhamma, but we can still be really, really good friends with other Dhamma teachers who teach a little bit different than I do. Just because he's my friend doesn't mean he's got to do it my way, see?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, so, um, but everything is worthy of investigation. And
Mm.
so this is one's right view.
Mm.
Now, let's go back and review a little bit with this in the sense of we start with wrong view, ordinary right view, and supramundane right view, or noble right view.
Mm.
The wrong view is chaotic, it's
Mm.
disgusting, it's every man for himself, it is greed oriented, it is capitalism.
Mm.
And that the ordinary right view is much more authoritarian in the sense of a king or a priest or some sort of authority that's of the government. And in fact, in the West, we normally have four. We have four bosses. Each human that I know of has all four of these bosses. Even though they're disgusted with one of them or two of them, still we understand that for most of humanity, these four bosses exist. This, and I call it the GREB:
Mm-hmm.
government, religion, education,
Mm.
and business.
Yeah.
These four all are in the business of lying.
Mm.
That's their job, is to lie to people and get away with it.
Yeah.
Business does this in the sense of you need our product. If you don't buy what I have to sell, you'll feel bad.
Mm.
And so it's sort of like a sucker punch, or another way of saying it, a bait and switch. That if I sell you, and this is for the young guys, my story is that in the old days, 1950s, they would have a fancy car on a turntable. There was a model level young lady in an evening gown, and the impression is, buy this car, you get this girl or one just like it. In other words, this car is a chick magnet,
Yeah.
right? And guess what? An awful lot of guys bought a car, and all they got was dents in a car payment.
Yeah. Mm.
Because chicks normally don't get attracted to the chick magnet; they get attracted to the guy himself.
Mm.
But the automobile industry had told an entire generation of young men that, in fact, I think BMW is still in that business.
Mm-hmm.
Is selling thrill and sex and excitement
Yeah.
when people all they really need is transportation.
Yeah. Yes.
That's government, or excuse me, that's business for us.
Mm.
And we can see it right down to the way that they package food.
Mm. Yeah.
Education, because education is required.
Mm.
Obviously, in the United States, homeschooling is one, not working, and two, it's still highly organized.
Mm. Okay.
But that education is a major thing. I mean, how many years were you involved in your lifetime? What,
Many.
probably probably a whole lot more than 10%, probably 20% of your life was dedicated to this institution called education.
Yes.
All right. Same thing with religion. People, I mean, they're captured by it, but also government and politics and all the rules. Guess what? Every one of these has a set of rules, regulations, policies, and all of that. And so this is what we put into the web of this ordinary right view,
Mm-hmm.
as well as basically everything that you were ever told.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this ordinary right view that we have is actually mostly stored information, remembered things, concepts, ideas about the way things are done, and that's stored in the part of the brain that Sigmund Freud would refer to as the superego,
Mm-hmm.
having the ego, the superego, and the id.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in a way, you can think of it is the id is the child, the wrong view, the ignorant baby who thinks he can get away with it.
Mm-hmm. I never got into, I'm a sociologist, so I never got into the psychologic
If you've got
theories.
sociology, you know exactly what we're talking about,
Yeah,
though.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Okay. And that, well, the superego that I mentioned, Eric Berne knew what you just stated. And so he changed the names of this stuff from superego, ego, and id down to parent, adult, and child. And I really like that.
Uh-huh.
So it's our parent ego state,
Mm-hmm.
which is where we store not just the parents and what they said, but
Mm-hmm.
all the teachers, all the politicians, all the religious nuts,
Yeah.
all the business people, all the educators. They get piled into this set of knowledge that we have that now we can refer to as our society. But we can also understand it from the Buddhist perspective that this is, in fact, the ordinary right view that we have is what he calls it. We get attached to that.
Yeah.
And he calls that, then that attachment is Sila Bhatta Paramasa. Sila Bhatta Paramasa means attachments to rites, rules, and rituals. And voila, that's exactly what we're talking about here. That's the ordinary right view is. So then the person will ask this question, how do I live my life? The kid or the ruffian or the ignorant one will say, any way I want to, as long as I can get away with it.
Mm.
And then the parent ego state will say, oh, to have a good life, you've got to follow all the rules. If you do everything right, then you'll get the right reward.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how both of those are failures.
Mm. Yeah.
One's just a deeper level of dukkha than the other one. That they can't make all of the rules right so that everybody will follow the rules. In fact, there's a whole lot of people out there who are doing everything they can to get away with it, no matter what the rules are.
Yeah.
So rules don't change or don't, the rule making and new rules are not the answer to wrong view.
Right.
But supramundane right view is personally to recognize that the way society works sucks.
Yeah.
There is so much inequity, and that no one gets out of it unscathed. Even the very rich wind up being very rich because they're very greedy. And their money doesn't change the way that they live. They just become basically more criminal in the sense they think now that they can get away with it.
Yeah.
And so wealth is not the solution, but yet people think if they follow all the rules, they get all the right degrees, they buy the right house and get the right trophy wife, etc., like that, then they will get the reward that they're seeking, which is a sense of well-being. But they don't even know how to do that. So instead, they make a change of it into thinking, oh, well, if I got that, then I would have a sense of well-being. Hence, we have this 40-year-old life crisis called Harley Davidson in the United States.
Mhm.
And I guess in Germany they call it BMW. Because they make some badass motorcycles too. And so this guy is looking for a thrill because all of the education he did and all the right, getting the right job and getting the right house and all of that, he's still now dissatisfied with life. He's done everything that he was told to do, and he has not gotten his reward. He may, in fact, be the CEO of the company,
Yeah.
but that's still a ho-hum, so what?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's got bragging rights, but even after, when he stops bragging to himself and to his friends, he winds up right back where he started, back into bad feelings again. So we need to get out of that and into this thing called supramundane right view, is to come out of our selfishness, come out of our own personality, and begin to see things at a greater level. And one of them is to begin to see this government, religion, education, business cycle that so many people are caught in, because we get caught into it on a regular basis also.
Yeah, whether we like it or not, one has to be part of it somehow. Yeah.
Well, Jesus had the phrase, be in the world, but not of it.
Okay.
But not of the world, yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
However, there's another perspective, and that is with wisdom, we can manage that world of society with aplomb. We can manage it smoothly. We can manage it nobly because we are not stuck in it anymore.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
In a way, we can take all of the furniture of the world and sort of move it aside and put it against the wall so that we can make a dance floor.
Yeah.
And that dance floor then is my life.
Yeah.
With all of that stuff is way out on the edge.
Yeah.
So that's the way of looking at it. So one's right view, one's right noble view, then is the basis for the practice. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a prerequisite for practice, but rather it's the basic foundation. And as our practice grows, this foundation gets stronger and stronger and capable of handling the load, or maybe the load gets lighter and lighter, and we really didn't need that much of a foundation in the first place.
Okay. Yeah.
That it wasn't really a foundation we needed. It was more like a launching pad, and we got that.
Yeah.
So that's another way of looking at one's right view, is that good trained, well-trained dogs that have the right equipment, like bloodhounds, can actually follow a trail to find someone who is, say, running away from the law. Like in one of my favorite movies, Cool Hand Luke, who was cool, and he did escape into the swamp, and so here they go with the dogs trying to locate him. But this was back in the 1930s. And they didn't have the kind of equipment that we have today, like drones. If the warden had sent out a drone over that swamp, he would have probably spotted Cool Hand Luke immediately, and then we wouldn't have had a movie. All right. So now we know that basically we have been living our lives as dogs, sniffing our way through life, when in fact we could be in the air looking down on things at a much more noble way, being above it. This is part of what we mean by being supramundane.
Yeah.
Is to be above the world so that we can see it really clearly. But we got to let go of the dang thing and get up into the air and get away from it all, so that now we can begin to really see it. Because the danger is that if we see something that we don't like, it'll pull us right back into it. Or if we see something that we do like, it'll pull us right back in. And now we're back into grasping and clinging again.
Yeah.
And so this is part of the reason why it's good to become secluded from the world, to get off into retreats.
Yeah.
Right now, everybody's doing that with Corona-19. Yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay, people are taking a rest. As a Dharma teacher, I'm all for people staying in seclusion.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that part.
So, by being secluded from the world, I think, just as a side note, that humanity may not come back to the old way with such a ferocity of greed. That this is a time when people can begin to reflect upon their lives and figure out that there's better things to do than following the grab. That takes up so much of our time in our life and our wants and our desires, so that we can spend our time making friends with each other.
Yeah.
And so this is one's right noble view. Now, the next part of the sutta is that which we have already discussed before, but I'll now take it again and say that in this sutta, unlike the standard way that the Eightfold Path is normally listed in most literature, which is right view, right attitude, we talked about it as right attention, then it does sila, and then it puts right mindfulness and right effort at the end of the thing with samadhi. That's not really the way that this sutta is lined up. It takes those three elements of morality or sila, right speech, right livelihood, and right action, and puts that after. So that the way that we look at it now is that one's right view, one's right attitude, one's right sati or mindfulness, and one's right effort brings about the unification of mind. And then the unification of mind brings about one's right action, one's right speech, and one's right livelihood. Because why? Because those things should be based upon our own right view and our own right understanding, rather than following a set of rules that we heard at the temple. Okay.
Yeah.
So, in the Buddhist religion, or the religion of the let us say the working peasant class of Thailand, is still quite caught up with this. In fact, Robert and I just had a long discussion that included that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had an amazing influence upon the intelligentsia of Thailand. And that part of the way that he did that was that he gave a set of lectures that in fact Robert is helping to get into print now, and that, because he's really excellent in Thai language. I'm really glad to have Robert as a friend. He does all the kinds of research that I am not able to do. He said that there was a set of lectures that was given to the judiciary of Thailand, but it wasn't like giving it to, say, the 9 Supreme Court justices. Rather, it was given at the biggest auditorium that the Justice Department of Thailand had, and it was literally filled with all of the justices and basically all of the law professors of the entire country and everything like that. And so it was through the legal way that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and this was back in I think this was in the 1950s even. But since that time, there are certain universities like Thammasat University that have a huge organization of students that are dedicated to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa.
Okay.
Now, what we're looking at then now is that Thailand has actually gotten the, the the way to think of it is like a lower class, a middle class, and an upper class.
Mm-hmm.
We can think of that in Thailand as the way that Buddhism is also structured, so that you have a very, very large lower class that see Buddhism as the Buddhist religion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then with all of the magic of the belief in rebirth and Tambun and building temples and all of the kinds of stuff that the laity do, including pushing their sons into becoming a monk.
Okay.
As part of the culture. But now, thanks to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, we have this huge, like millions of people who were in the middle and upper middle class who see Buddhism in a completely different way now. They say it now as much more of a way of life.
Mm-hmm.
That it's actually going in the direction of actual noble, because it's seeing things from the problem of life is selfishness and our personality. And that the noble right view is to see things at a higher level that has a lot of altruism and generosity and all of that kind of stuff built into it.
Mm.
And now we can look at that actually upper class in Thailand is surprising, because it not only has a lot to do with the aristocracy of Thailand, not just the intellectuals, but I'm talking about old money, aristocracy.
Mm.
The size of it, an indication is that King Mongkut, I think he died in 1868, and he had like 50 children. Maybe it was 47, but that was okay. Now, from 1860, how many kids are going to branch out of 47 royal princes and whatnot? Because there are a huge number of princes and princesses in Thailand. But the surprise is that the nobility of Thailand had very good access to the very best monks who really knew the teachings of the Buddha. And there's one prince that I know of who's really, really quite famous. He's very interesting. He was one of the children of Mongkut. He was born in 1860. His name is Vichot, but I'll send you a link on Google, on Wikipedia about him. He was born in 1860. When he was 8 years old, Chula Longhorn became the king. And he and Chula Longhorn were really, really close. And so Vichai actually reformed Buddhism, wrote books, and was very, very well known as being one of the highest intellectuals in Thailand of his day. But he disrobed as a monk because he was in line for the throne. And so he disrobed, became a king, and then died about 2 years later, 1920 or so, like that, which brings us well within the lifetime of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And there's a big connection between this particular monk and let us call it the upper elite of the Buddhist monks in Thailand. They have several categories. One is the category of Chao Kun. And then at the highest level, there's Samdet. And also there's the level of Sangha Raj. And the word Sangha Raj, you can see, is the king of the Sangha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the word Samdet is much more like the prime minister, but these are the guys, and that there are 6 of them in Thailand. And this is the very, very top. And then one of those guys is going to be the absolute top. His name at that time was Buddha Gosajarn, and he actually bailed Bhikkhu Buddhadasa out of the problems and turmoils of the 1930s when Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was actually spreading the Noble Dhamma en masse, and that he got in trouble for that. And the trouble that they were saying that he was causing was that he was splitting the Sangha, a Sangha Dasesa, a breakup of the Sangha. But the noble monks were part of this in Bangkok. And this one monk who was associated with the king, that's how he became the Sumdet, in fact, is this the king was his teacher. And that when he as part of the royalty as well as part of the monkhood, promoted this guy to be the top monk of the country. He then bails out Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and partially by launching an investigation of the suttas, is exactly what is in there. What it comes out is that the teachings of rebirth was the Buddha knew all about that because he had Brahmin students. But any time that the Buddha would give recommendations about rebirth, he would say to come out of it. And he also, just like he did many other words, examples would be Nibbana, Aryan, Brahman. The Buddha would change the definitions of these words because the word Nibbana actually meant to train an animal. And an animal was Nibbana when it was domesticated, or that food was cool when it was taken out of the fire. You can't eat food when it's hot, and you can't really put an animal to work when it's wild. And so this is the idea of Nibbana. But now it's magic.
Yeah.
Now people think of Nibbana as something magical rather than just be cool. The word Aryan. We've now, it was actually a racial issue, but the Buddha is using it in the sense of high class or high quality. That one must be born in the lineage of the nobles. That there's very small little similarities between what Jesus taught and what the Buddha taught. It is like, okay, they must have gotten together on this. And that is the whole idea of being reborn in the Jesus' way. Is not that you've got to go through the womb again, but that you've got to reborn your mind in the spirit.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is exactly what we mean by the change of lineage when one becomes noble. Yeah. And so this is that old quality of noble. And so we see that these words he's changed around in their various meanings because that was the only language he had to go with in the first place. Yeah. So in the way of looking at view, we have to stop thinking of view as a viewpoint and much more like a drone that moves around, that can search, that can see overhead without crash landing back on Earth. So it's super mundane in that sort of way of looking at it. And so this is that Pali word of lokatara. Lokatara actually means, or the word that's translated into transcendent. I don't like that word too much, but supramundane, because it's above the mundane world. It's out of the mundane world. This is what we mean by lokatara. And so one of my students had the idea, I don't know where he got it from, but I like it very much. He says that every human being is an emperor of his own pile of dirt.
Yeah.
Everyone is an emperor of their own pile of dirt. The question is, are you going to be buried under your pile of dirt? Are you going to be able to sit on top of your pile of dirt?
Yeah.
Well, if you're sitting on top of your pile of dirt, that means you're sitting on top of the world. That's supramundane. That's lokatara. Yeah. It's not being in the world. We're being, so that going back to that analogy that I gave a while ago of let's clear the dining hall of all of the furniture and make a dance floor.
Yeah.
So that all of that stuff is pushed away over to the side. But another way that I like to look at it is sitting on top of our own world. This is one's noble right view. And so this is what then goes together with one's right sati.
Mm.
Sati and effort,
Mm.
Buddha says, runs in circles around one's right view.
Mm.
And then we add, and this is actually the way that we practice anapanasati, is that right view, right effort, and right sati run and circle around each other for a while we're cleaning the mind. And then we add right attitude, so that now the four of them are together. Well, what is that right attitude? The attitude of a winner, the attitude I can do this, the attitude that I am on top of the world, at least my own pile of dirt. And so that's the attitude that we have.
Yeah.
And that's then these four things come together is what then gives right noble samadhi, or right unification of mind. So what does that mean? Basically, when we're talking about first jhana, we gather the jhana factors together. There are 5 of them. But the unification of mind has 4 constituent components, but together there are 5, including the right noble unification of these things. So it's not just the 4 individually, but when they come together as a unit, is when it becomes a unified mind. And many people don't understand it all. They think about right noble concentration. What does that mean? I go around with great big glasses on? Or that the only lens I have on my camera is a telephoto lens? Okay. Because if we have that kind of concentration, then we don't have anything like right view. So it could not possibly at all be right noble concentration. But it is very specifically pointed out that this is unification of mind.
Yeah.
Now, when the mind is unified, we don't lie. Therefore, our speech is good. When the mind is unified and whole with all the security and everything there, we don't find enemies. All we find is friends.
Yeah.
Why? Because when we're friends, we join together. When we're enemies, we separate. No unification there.
Yeah.
And so any way that you can think of the mind being unified, that means that we're not going to be doing something that would keep it from being unified.
Yeah.
So if the mind is unified, which means now we're free from wanting, because wanting something we don't have is not a unified mind.
Yeah.
But if we're content and we have everything we want right now, then we're unlikely to go rob the house next door or
Yeah.
stick up someone or whatever. We're just not going to do that because we're good to go. We're content. We've got what we need, what we want. And so in that regard, our sila becomes quite high class quite easily, to where it really is possible for someone to struggle through a set of rules so that they become a goody two-shoes. They keep every rule. Let us say at a university, you've got one kid and he's just, but the problem is that he's a misfit. He's a nerd. Often he's in mental turmoil about how to follow the rules. That the only thing he's got is that guidance so I can follow the rules. But that kind of mind is now not free from suffering at all. So we have to turn the thing upside down and say, oh, what we're going to do is get the mind fit for work. We're going to get the mind unified and whole, and then we don't have to worry about our behavior. Our behavior is automatically going to be very high class, very noble, in fact. And so the sila is not the cause of perfection, it's the result. Well, perfection is not a good word to use. Perhaps purification of mind.
Yeah.
And so this is the Eightfold Noble Path that we have talked about today in a very formal way. But by doing so, we can see how all of this stuff fits together.
Yeah.
And how the Eightfold Noble Path then when we put it into practice, we put it into practice using Anapanasati as a vehicle.
Mm.
And that as Anapanasati as a vehicle for practicing the Eightfold Noble Path, that then fulfills all of the points of the four foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana. And the Satipatthana then, through Anapanasati, is practiced then for the fulfillment of the Sambhojana.
Mm.
Now, it's kind of interesting in the way that in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Eightfold Noble Path is discussed in great detail, especially in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta in the Dingha. But that in the Anapanasati Sutta, there is no mention of the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths. But what the Anapanasati Sutta has in it instead is the Sambhojana, the seven factors of enlightenment. But when you look at the seven factors of enlightenment, there you find the Eightfold Noble Path with a couple of pieces missing. And what are the pieces that are missing? Well, Sila is the part that's missing, but it's got a couple of new things put into it. But basically what makes the Sambhojana means the seven factors of awakening, or the factors of enlightenment. So these are the factors that we will have. The thing that distinguishes in the seven factors of enlightenment from the Eightfold Noble Path is one word. And that one word is unremitting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when students begin to practice the Eightfold Path, they begin to practice the Eightfold Path intermittently.
Mm-hmm.
But as they gain skill, that intermittent practice gets to be more and more repetitive over and over and over again, to the point that it becomes unremitting. Bang, 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 bang.
Mm.
That's a little bit too often for the bangs. I'd say a bang for the in-breath and a bang for the out-breath. So bang, bang, like that. But it's still unremitting. And so the factors of enlightenment, first is sati. Here, sati is king. This is why I keep putting to the students, your number one skill to be developed is sati. To the point that it becomes unremitting and it keeps coming back and coming back. Why? Because when sati is not there, we're going to be in hindrance more than likely. But when sati is there, we're going to come out of the hindrances. And so the second point is investigation. Unremitting investigation. We keep looking, we keep looking, we keep looking, but we never draw a conclusion. Why? Because if you draw a conclusion, that conclusion will change, and you'll be back in suffering, disappointed. Our conclusion wasn't permanent.
Yeah.
And so we don't draw conclusions, we keep drawing.
Oh.
We keep looking, we keep investigating. Well, now what we look like is that in fact, in this regard, the two first items on the list of the Buddha in the Eightfold Noble Path are now reversed. Because this investigation, unremitting investigation, is in fact one's right view. To keep investigating, to keep going with wisdom, to keep figuring things out. But here, mindfulness, why? Because mindfulness, if we don't have sati, then we can't have investigation. We can only investigate when we remember to investigate. And so sati becomes king here. Sati is number one. But right effort then takes a marvelous transformation. When it becomes unremitting, it's no longer an effort. Now it's actually an energy on its own. That it's easy. An example of that is if you got to push the car off and it's dead still, pushing is a lot of work. But once you get it rolling, now it's kind of easy to get it rolling, and you don't even want to get it rolling too fast.
No.
And so it gains a momentum of its own, or an inertia. And so when that inertia or that unremitting energy occurs, that means that that's the fulfillment or the fruition of one's right effort. In the beginning, it takes effort. It does. To remember to throw that stuff out of the mind and take a deep breath and to enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
Goes against the grain of personality. But now that we have unremitting effort based upon unremitting mindfulness and unremitting investigation, now the fourth item on the list is actually unremitting pity. Now, here the word pity is much softer rather than the really, really strong rapture, but rather it's kind of joyful, unremitting joy. In fact, that's the word that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uses here, is that it's joy. It's just happiness. It's just satisfaction is possibly the right word here to use. And only then does the next item come. So we've got unremitting mindfulness, unremitting investigation, unremitting effort or energy, unremitting joy. With that joy then comes peacefulness. A lot of people think that Anapanasati step 4 is getting the body to be tranquilized or peaceful. They don't recognize, no, you have to have the joy and the empty mind before the body will actually settle down and come to rest. And you can see that in this place, because it's item number 5 on the list, is when the body becomes relaxed.
Okay.
Then the next item is equanimity, and that a lot of people misunderstand that. I would say when they use the word balance, I'm going to say, yes, we can use the word balance, but now put that balance wheel that we're talking about, balance, on a train. And let that train go and chug, 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 and forward and backward and side to side motion. And now, how's that balance doing?
Yeah, I never understood the word balance either. That's
okay. Yeah. Well, here's what it means. If you can understand this, I'll give you this term. It's sea legs. Equanimity means sea legs. Can you keep your balance when you're on a boat? Landlubbers, they can't stand. Sometimes they'll get knocked around, but the sailors, they know what to grab and how to put what part of the weight on where the foot is positioned, and they can walk around even while the bottom of the boat is, or the floor of the boat is, or the deck rather, is all over the place. Okay.
That makes sense.
This is exactly how we're going to then manage that world. When we're lokatara, when we're above the world, it doesn't matter how much the world is shaking, we're going to maintain our balance or our equanimity or our sea legs. That's how we are able to be the emperor of our own pile of dirt. Even though it keeps shifting, we can still maintain our posture by shifting around so that we're still on top of it. That's what equanimity means. It means sea legs.
Okay.
Okay. And now with that, we come to that unremitting samadhi mind, or the unremitting mind that is whole. We cannot really have that mind that's really whole if it gets shaken around. So that's why the sea legs are needed.
Oh, yeah.
And so we can maintain our balance, or maintain and gather together that ability to be just one person. Because most people are a crowd. They go from this, this to that. They go from I'm angry to I'm sad to I'm hungry to I got to go to the bathroom to I'm a banker. or I'm a carpenter, or I'm a parent, or I'm a this or a that. Okay, so you can see how there's a whole crowd of us there.
Yeah.
So the question, who am I, is a long list of things until we get that balanced, organized mind.
Mm.
And then when they ask that question, who am I? The answer is, duh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of coming, and it's about the only word that seems to fit is the word human, but
Mm.
that's not last.
No. 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 I haven't had so much problem with defining myself in that way. Uh, Looking for who I am or who I am not, because I kind of knew I'm all of those things.
But really, not any of them.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of undefinable in that way. Yeah.
In that way, you're right. Our concepts fail us.
Yes. Yeah.
And the reason for it is because all the knobs and buttons and aspects of this concept is
Yeah.
just too hard to put down into words. It's
Exactly.
far too big and far too complex.
Yeah. Mm.
And yet it's unified.
Mm.
There's just one thing there.
Mm. Yeah.
And so this is the Eightfold Noble Path in its fruition is the Sambhojana.
Mm.
And so that's how those teachings fit together.
Mm.
Just like Paticca fits under the second noble truth.
Mm.
This is the Eightfold Noble Path. And the Eightfold Noble Path is these factors that wind up being unremitting, but they're still factors of the Eightfold Noble Path.
Yeah. Okay.
With these two extras thrown in, and that is peace and sea legs.
Mm.
Do you have any questions about the Eightfold Noble Path now?
Not really. No. It makes sense, and you
It
kind of
does.
said
It fits right together, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and you kind of said it to before too, but things are added now that makes even more sense. So, yeah, it's no, it's I don't have any questions. No.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I like your gushing. That's good.
Yeah. So, yeah, actually, I think I've been experiencing much of this now. All that the confidence has come that I kind of know I can change it, even if I cannot change it right now always. But also this, I'm pleased to see that I can see it too. It's a big thing, and this disgust and all of that kind of fell into place. Yeah, I think I had, yeah, let's see, anger. Could being bothered or disturbed or agitated, is that kind of anger things?
Let's talk about that next time because that's
Okay.
quite a topic.
Okay.
That's quite a topic. And in fact, agitation and anger are just the same thing.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That Book of Buddhadasa makes the point that that's hell state.
Yeah. Okay.
That we're reborn in hell when we're angry.
Yes. Yeah.
But seeing it closer and closer as it comes, we should take a time to talk about that.
Yeah.
Next time. So remind me when you call, and we'll do
Yeah.
that then.
Mm.
So long as you understand the value and the use of the noble right view,
Mm.
then things begin to fall into place very well.
Mm. 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 Yeah. Yes, they are falling into place. That's very nice.
Okay. All right. Well, let's end this conversation, and then we'll talk about the emails that I sent to you. Do you have a few more moments to talk about that?
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll check out now.
Yes.
Don't hang up, and we'll just turn the video off.
Mm.